Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway. I'm glad you joined me for this particular series of message. I'm beginning a brand new series. This is called The Love of God Perfected, and it is taken from 1 John chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. And I'll be also sharing today the concept of new and old, and this will come from John chapter 2, verses 7 through 11, where John tells us that he gives us an old yet new commandment. Uh, the love of God perfected is a powerful word, and I'll be talking about that more and more throughout the next few Sundays. But I like the Greek word that is used there. It comes from a Greek word telos, which means to have a goal in sight. And I'll be talking a little bit about how Aristotle used that particular word in the next few Sundays. But uh, suffice it to say that it means to bring love to its goal. And so what John is talking about in verses 4 and 5 of chapter 2 of First John is this concept of bringing love to its perfect end or its goal or its purpose. And so when we talk about that, John wants us to also keep in mind the idea that this commandment of God is both old and new. The word February comes from a Latin word februar, which was actually a cultic item that was used in the celebration of the Lupercalia. The Lupercalia was a celebration that took place primarily in the city of Rome, beginning over 600 years before the time of Christ and ending about 400 years after the time of Christ. So it was a very long-standing celebration. In fact, it was so long-standing that by the time the Romans began writing down the customs that were involved, they had lost the meaning behind most of the customs that were practiced during the Lupercalia. It centered around the Lupercal, which was the supposed cave where the she-wolf who nursed Romulus and Remus, the twins that founded Rome, when they were babies, she is supposedly to have kept them in her den until a shepherd took them away, and she would nurse them and protect them. And so it's centered around this concept of the Lupercal. It was a major patriotic celebration within the city of Rome, and it took place on the 15th and 16th in the city of Rome in February. They used during the celebration a small whip made out of raw goat skin that was taken from the sacrificed goats that were sacrificed in the Lupercal, and the hides would be stripped and made into small whips that young men would run throughout the city whipping young women with, and they believed that that process would either provide fertility for young women or would allow them to have an easy childbirth if they were pregnant. And we don't know where that came from. The Romans don't even know where it came from. They just know that it had become part of the celebration and was very, very ancient by the time they began writing down the celebratory acts of the Lupercalia. They also involved a lot of sensuality and sexual license during the Lupercalia. It became kind of central, and in the Roman world, love very often involves sensuality. It had very little to do with the concept of companionship or care or relationship. It had an awful lot to do with sensuality. And so Christians very much reacted against that concept. They very much disliked the Lupercalia and did what they could to discourage it as Christianity grew within the Roman world. We don't know what brought about these concepts within the Roman culture, but we do know something about what happened within the Greek and what happened within the Hebrew cultures that would lead up to the Christian understanding of love. The ancient Greeks had a view of love, the highest goal of love being that of what was called Phileo. Phileo was the concept of brotherly care, or the idea of caring for another person as a brother relationship, and that was considered the highest goal of love within the Greek culture. It was the idea that you cared about someone and developed a deep and lasting relationship with that person built on respect and mutual concern. Another Greek word that was used even by Homer was agapao. Agapao is an interesting word. Its basic meaning is somewhat lost in ancient history, but Homer used it in the sense of esteem, and it came to be used as a synonym for phileo in ancient Greek. By the time that the Hebrew writers were translating the Hebrew Bible into Greek about 200 years before Christ, they picked up this word and used it to translate a couple of Hebrew words. The word chesed was often translated with this word, and the Hebrew word hesed generally is translated as loving kindness. It also was used to translate the Hebrew word ahav. The word ahav is very similar to the concept of esteem. It was the idea of holding somebody in high regard, and it was central to the Hebrew understanding of love. And so when these words were used, it was a way of understanding esteem, and it came to be used particularly in relationship to God's love, the esteem he had for his creation, the love and care that he took for creation. It also had a reflection of the love that human beings should have for one another. And it's believed the Hebrew people coined the term agape. It is a noun form of the Greek verb agapao. It means intelligent goodwill, to have an intelligent good intention toward another. And that came into the Christian faith and into the Greek Christian world as a concept or a goal toward which we should aim our lives, having intelligent goodwill toward others. Jesus would use the word extensively in the Gospels, where he would talk about the love that we should have. He would identify it as in Matthew's Gospel and in Mark's Gospel as the central heart of the law. He would say that we must love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and that we should love our neighbor as ourself. And that word agapao and agape is used in those contexts. The idea that the law is completed, and Paul would pick that up in Romans, where he would talk about the law being completed in this concept of loving God and loving our neighbors, that when we have fulfilled those, we have fulfilled God's purpose. In fact, Paul and James both would, in a way, bring it down to a shorthand that if we love our neighbors as ourselves, that we will be reflecting the character of God. And James would go so far as to call it the royal law, the law of God in our lives. This concept of what is both old and new. John uses an interesting word in verses 7 through 11 of chapter 2 in 1 John. He uses a word which means ancient commandment. The ancient commandment. He wants to take us back to the very foundations of the law where God speaks through Moses and says, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And that comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. And then love your neighbor as yourself. And that comes from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, where we must love our neighbor as ourselves. These two concepts are central to the Christian faith. They are right at the very heart of what we believe and what we are. That's why John could say they are both old, and then he says they are new. They are a new commandment to us. He took that from Jesus speaking with his disciples in John chapter 13, where he says, I leave you a new commandment. And the word there, new, in John chapter 13 and in 1 John chapter 2 is the word kainos, and it means new of a different quality. And the idea was that the message of the commandment is you must love one another as I have loved you, Jesus said. So it is a new commandment, a commandment that takes up the idea of loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves, and reflects it in our love for Christ as we fulfill his will and his commandments in our lives. And as we do those things, we transform the world around us. I'm fascinated by the rhyme, something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, a sixpence in the shoe. I like that rhyme. They believe it comes from Lancaster in England, but it first was written down in the 1880s and became a regular part of the wedding ceremony. The idea was to grab hold of something from the past, from the past of the young lady who was getting married, and bring it into the relationship. Something new was a gift from the groom to his bride, and it was a way of saying, I want you in my life. The something borrowed was to be borrowed from a lady who had already been successful in marriage, and so you borrowed that item from her as a token or as a promise of building a solid marriage relationship. And then you took that which was blue because blue represented that which was true and loyal, and so you wanted to exhibit loyalty and truth. And then the sixpence in the shoe was a gift from the father of the bride as a hope that the new couple would be successful in life. I like that rhyme because it talks about grabbing hold of the old and the new. And if we are to be Christians, we need to grab hold of the old, what God has told us in the Old Testament of himself, and that which is new, what Jesus Christ revealed of God's purpose in the New Testament, his love for us, his love for the world. Something old and something new. God bless you. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Have a wonderful day. God bless.